Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're tackling self-discipline, using Ryan Holiday's work as kind of a springboard. But we're going to weave in a ton of historical examples and other cool insights along the way.
Sounds intense.
It is, but also, surprisingly fun. At least that's what we're going for.
I'm in.
So our mission here is basically to distill the essence of what self-discipline really means. Like, how does it show up in our lives, and how do we actually put it into practice? No BS, no sugarcoating, just straight to the good stuff.
I like it.
And we know you're busy. So we're aiming for those aha moments, those insights that just stick with you, not some overwhelming data dump.
That's the worst.
The worst. Okay, so right off the bat, something jumped out at me from the research. This whole notion that self-discipline isn't some big one-time decision like flipping a switch.
Right.
But it's actually about a million tiny choices we make every single day.
It's a constant process for sure. Kind of like that old story about Hercules at the crossroads. He had to choose between the easy path, full of pleasure, and the hard path. The one that leads to, virtue.
I love that crossroads image. And the thing is, it's not just some mythical thing, right? It's playing out in our lives all the time, like every day. Do we hit snooze or get up for that workout? Do we grab the donuts or the fruit? Do we speak up when something's wrong, or do we just stay quiet?
Yeah, those everyday choices, they add up. They really do. And that actually ties in with Aristotle's idea that virtue is like a craft. He said something like, we become builders by building houses, and we become harp players by, playing the harp.
Practice, practice, practice.
Exactly. It's the same with character. We become disciplined by making those disciplined choices over and over and over again.
And this is where the whole idea of temperance comes in. And I used to think of temperance as just denying yourself things.
Like deprivation.
Yeah, exactly. But digging into the sources, it's so much deeper than that. It's about having command over yourself, your body, your mind, your whole being.
It's about pushing yourself even when no one's watching, because you know it's the right thing to do.
And that's not easy by any means. It takes a lot of courage to consistently demand your best. It's like that image of the charioteer trying to control a team of powerful horses.
Right. The horses represent our impulses, our desires, and if you lose control, you're going to crash.
So it's not just about reining them in completely, right? It's about finding that balance, knowing when to push hard and when to hold back.
Exactly. And that's why I think the sources link discipline to freedom, because true freedom isn't about doing whatever you want whenever you want. It's about having that self-control to make the choices that lead to a better life.
The sources actually say freedom requires discipline. Discipline gives us freedom, freedom and greatness.
Powerful stuff. Seriously. So, for you listening out there, the question is, are you going to grab those reins? Or are you going to let yourself be pulled along by whatever's in front of you?
Big question.
Now, let's talk about where this whole self-discipline thing starts. And the sources point to our physical selves, our bodies, as the foundation.
The exterior, they call it.
Right, the exterior. St. Paul even said we got to keep our bodies under control. And the Stoics, they were all about endurance, simple living, not getting too attached to material possessions. They embraced a pretty stripped-down existence.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, would we look at their lifestyle as oh, they're missing out, or wow, they were really onto something?
Right, in today's world, we're constantly bombarded with temptations. Everything's about indulging. More is always better.
Yeah, and it's not about becoming some ascetic monk or anything. But the point is, the Stoics believed that by mastering our physical desires, we could gain a level of inner strength that would spill over into every area of our lives.
That mental toughness, the fortitude to stick to our goals even when it's hard. Exactly. The sources ask a really good question. If you're not in control of your own body, who is?
That's a good one. I mean, we all know how easily we can get derailed by distractions, by laziness, by our own bad habits.
Yeah.
Self-discipline is about taking back that control.
Totally. And one of the best examples of this in action is, Lou Gehrig, the Iron Horse himself.
Baseball legend.
Legendary. And his dedication to the game was insane. It wasn't just about hitting home runs. It was about respecting every aspect of the game.
He wouldn't mistreat his baseball bat, for example. Even played stickball with kids on the street, that level of commitment.
And think about it. There must have been days when he was tired or sore or just didn't feel like it, but he showed up anyway.
He made a conscious choice to be disciplined, even when it wasn't glamorous or easy. And I think that's what separates the truly great from everyone else.
Right. And it's important to remember that discipline isn't about depriving yourself. It's about realizing that by delaying gratification, By putting in the hard work, you can achieve things that wouldn't be possible otherwise.
There's even that story about Gehrig playing amazingly well while hungover. But the sources are quick to point out that relying on unusual circumstances isn't a reliable strategy.
Yeah, discipline is what gets you there consistently.
And then there's that iconic moment when Gehrig finally broke into the Yankees lineup, starting that unbelievable streak of consecutive games. He was hit by a pitch, and his response was, "It's taken me 3 years to get into this game. It's going to take more than a crack on the head to get me out."
What a line.
And then years later, when he was diagnosed with ALS, his body started failing him. But his spirit, his self-discipline, never wavered.
That farewell speech at Yankee Stadium, I mean, chills. Talk about grace under pressure.
Even in the face of such devastating loss, he found a way to remain positive. He called himself the luckiest man despite it all. That's mastering your lower self to reach a higher plane,
Totally. Like, he embodied that Churchill quote, "Never give in, never, never, never."
Yeah, powerful stuff. And it really drives home the point that if we don't master our physical selves, our bodies will eventually master us.
No doubt about it.
All right, shifting gears a bit. From physical discipline to the discipline of routine, the sources highlight Toni Morrison's writing ritual. She would get up before dawn every day, make a cup of coffee, and write, like clockwork.
Amazing. That quiet time before the world wakes up, it can be so powerful for creative work.
And she managed to produce an incredible amount of work while also being a dedicated mother.
Proof that it's not about being superhuman, it's about having that discipline to make time for the things that matter most.
The sources even address those of us who think we're not morning people.
Yeah, they pretty much call us out on that one.
Right. Like nobody's a morning person. It's about recognizing the value of that time and choosing to use it wisely.
Exactly. It's a choice.
Now, I got to talk about the comparison between King George III and Teddy Roosevelt. Talk about two totally different approaches to life.
Yeah, one was all about indulging himself. The other was about pushing himself to the limits.
George V was basically a prisoner of his own bad habits, excess of every kind. Roosevelt, on the other hand, was born sickly, weak. But he deliberately chose a life of strenuous activity, both physical and mental.
And he became one of the most influential presidents in American history.
Exactly. And this really shows that self-discipline isn't about denying yourself all pleasure. It's about channeling it, directing it towards something meaningful.
Like the pleasure of achieving a difficult goal, the pleasure of knowing you're living up to your potential.
The Stoic philosopher Musonius Rufus said a philosopher's body should be trained for action, ready for any task. It's a tool for virtue.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like your body and mind are working together to achieve something greater.
Now let's talk about breaking bad habits, because we all have them. And the examples of Eisenhower quitting smoking cold turkey and Feynman giving up alcohol because he refused to let anything control him, those are really inspiring.
Like Eisenhower just said, the only way to stop is to stop. Just like that. No excuses.
So powerful. And the sources challenge us to think about our own bad habits. What are you hooked on? What do you find hard to live without?
It's a question worth asking.
For sure.
Yeah.
And then there's this fascinating concept of avoiding the superfluous, which was kind of Cato the Elder's whole deal. He rejected expensive stuff, wore plain clothes, even drank the same cheap wine as his slaves.
Like, his goal wasn't to be a miser. It was about freedom.
Yeah, he believed that by limiting his desires, he could remain independent. He said, nothing is cheap if it's superfluous.
That's a good one.
Right. And the Spartan king, he said, freedom is what we reap from this way of life. Meaning, when you're not constantly chasing stuff, you're free to focus on what really matters.
And it's not just about material possessions. It's about desires in general. The more we want, the more vulnerable we become.
Absolutely. And speaking of simplifying, this whole outer order, inner calm thing really resonated with me.
Yeah, the idea that a tidy environment can lead to a more peaceful mind.
Right. And Robert Moses, the guy who built so much in New York City, he was known for his incredible productivity. And apparently his office was always spotless.
I can see that. When your surroundings are chaotic, it's hard to focus.
Right. And Toni Morrison, she gave her writing students advice about creating their ideal workspace. She knew that environment plays a huge role in creativity.
Flaubert even said, be regular and orderly in your life so that you may be violent and original in your work.
Love that quote. So yeah, clean your desk, make your bed. It might seem like a small thing, but it can actually make a big difference.
It can.
Now let's talk about Thomas Edison. He famously said he had no imagination and it created nothing.
I doubt that's entirely true.
Of course. But his point was that his success wasn't about some magical spark of brilliance. It was about relentless work,
Right.
constant experimentation.
He was all about just showing up and putting in the hours.
Exactly. And the sources emphasize that we can only tackle the big, complex problems when we've mastered the small stuff.
Like, you can't build a skyscraper if you can't even lay a brick straight.
Perfect analogy. Admiral Hyman Rickover said, "The devil is in the details, but so is salvation." Meaning, details matter. A lot.
It's true. We can't ignore the small things.
Now, this brings us to a topic that can be a bit frustrating. Hustle, hustle, hustle.
The constant pressure to be doing.
And the flip side of that is the frustration of dealing with people who are slow to act.
You mean like General McClellan in the Civil War? Lincoln was constantly pulling his hair out over that guy.
Exactly. And the message here is, don't be the person who has the slows. Be ready to move, be ready to act. You never know when opportunity will knock.
Makes sense.
But then we had this really interesting counterpoint. Slow down to go faster.
Now that's a paradox.
Right. But it's about recognizing that sometimes rushing leads to mistakes. The example they give is Octavian, who later became Emperor Augustus. He lived by the saying, more haste, less speed.
So it's not about being lazy or passive. It's about being strategic, being deliberate.
Exactly. And General George Thomas, he was nicknamed Old Slow Trot because he was so careful, so meticulous in his preparations.
And he ended up winning a crucial battle at Nashville because of it.
And there's that Latin phrase, festina lente, which basically means hurry slowly. It's about combining energy with moderation.
Kind of like the tortoise and the hare, right? Slow and steady wins the race.
Exactly. And this leads us to the incredible power of consistent practice. There's a quote from Octavian's teacher. Practice over a long time turns into second nature.
Like, you do it so much, it becomes automatic.
And there's that great story about Miyamoto Musashi, the legendary samurai. Someone tried to ambush him, and he was instantly ready to defend himself because he had trained so relentlessly.
Talk about being prepared.
And Musashi believed in training all the time, every day. He said, 1,000 days of training for 1 day of battle, 10,000 days of training for 10,000 days of battle.
Wow.
Bill Bradley, the basketball player and senator, he said something like, if you're not practicing, someone else is. And when you meet them, they'll win.
That's a sobering thought.
It is. And Joyce Carol Oates, the incredibly prolific writer, she's a great example of this. The Greeks had a word for it, philoponia, which means love of hard work.
And for people who are truly dedicated to their craft, not working feels wrong.
Like it's almost like a form of torture for them.
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay, shifting gears again, another key aspect of self-discipline is resisting superficiality. And they use Angela Merkel's clothing choices as an example.
Really?
Yeah, she's known for her very practical, consistent wardrobe. Like she's not trying to be a fashion icon.
Makes sense.
Her focus is on her work, on serving the people.
Steve Jobs was similar, right? He wore the same thing every day.
Exactly. It's about eliminating unnecessary decisions and freeing up mental space for what truly matters.
It's about recognizing that while neglecting your appearance might show a lack of discipline, obsessing over fleeting trends is also a distraction from deeper pursuits.
I like that. It's a good balance.
Yeah.
Now, the sources make this interesting argument that disciplined people are actually comfortable being uncomfortable.
How so?
Well, they suggest that we should intentionally seek out discomfort, like run a marathon, sleep on the ground, do things that push our limits.
Like a form of training.
Exactly. Because when we get too comfortable, we become soft. We become afraid of losing that comfort.
Makes sense.
And Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, he practiced voluntary poverty. He would intentionally live simply for a period of time.
Just to build that resilience.
Exactly. And Gandhi, his early experiences with hardship, probably contributed to his incredible strength later on.
Yeah, facing those challenges head on can really build character.
And the sources point out that by practicing a degree of temperance when things are good, we're better prepared for the tough times.
That's a good point. It's like building up a reserve of inner strength.
Okay, now let's talk about managing your workload. And they use Greg Popovich, the coach of the San Antonio Spurs, as an example. He's known for resting his star players even when they're healthy.
Yeah, I remember that. A lot of people criticize him for it.
But his focus is on the long-term health of the team. He's willing to sacrifice short-term gains for sustainability.
That takes discipline, for sure.
And then there's a cautionary tale of James Forrestal, who was Truman's Secretary of Defense. He worked himself to exhaustion, had a mental breakdown, and tragically committed suicide.
A reminder that even the most dedicated people can burn out.
And the sources ask, do you want people to look at you in a few years, when you are a husk of your former self, and think about what could have been?
That's a powerful question.
Really is. And even sleep, something we often take for granted, is presented as an act of character.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of it that way.
But the boxer Floyd Patterson, he was super disciplined about getting a full night's sleep before his big fight.
Makes sense. You can't perform at your best when you're exhausted.
Right. And Admiral James DeVritis, he realized that his crew's sleep cycles were crucial for their performance.
So it's not just about physical recovery. It's about mental clarity, about making better decisions.
Absolutely. There's a saying, the best way to master the morning is to have mastered it the night before.
I like that.
And to wrap up this first part of our exploration, the sources ask a really fundamental question. What can you endure?
What can we endure?
And they use Ernest Shackleton, the Antarctic explorer, as an example.
Yeah.
His ship got stuck in the ice, and he and his crew had to endure unimaginable hardships.
I've read about that. It's an incredible story of survival.
Insane. And he refused to give up. He was determined to bring his crew home alive.
It makes our everyday complaints seem pretty insignificant, huh?
It really does. And the point is, great leaders, athletes, thinkers, they've all been able to endure pain, setbacks, challenges. Think of Edison and his light bulb, or Toni Morrison writing every morning.
Yeah, self-discipline allows us to push through those tough times.
And ultimately, it frees us. It frees us from being controlled by our immediate desires, by our fears, by our own weaknesses.
So it's not just about achieving something. It's about becoming someone.
Exactly. Okay, now we're going to dive into the second part of our deep dive, which focuses on the inner domain. The sources argue that controlling our thoughts, our feelings, our impulses, our temperament, is even more important than just physical discipline.
So it's about what's going on inside our heads.
Yeah, like the internal stuff. Someone once said about FDR that he had a second-class intellect and a first-class temperament.
Meaning his personality, his ability to connect with people was his greatest strength.
Exactly. And the sources really emphasize that temperament is everything. It's the foundation for all other forms of self-control.
I can see that. If you're constantly reacting emotionally, you're never going to be able to make clear, rational decisions.
Right. And they use Queen Elizabeth II as a prime example of mastering your inner world. She's been the queen for, forever.
Yeah.
And that role demands an incredible amount of self-control.
I mean, she's constantly in the public eye. Every move she makes is scrutinized.
And yet, she always manages to maintain her composure. She's known for her quiet brilliance, her attention to detail, her genuine interest in people.
And she's had to navigate some pretty tough times, like that Annus Horribilis when all those scandals were happening.
And she did it with grace and dignity. Even her response to criticism was carefully balanced. She acknowledged concerns while also maintaining her composure.
That's a good example of how self-discipline can help you navigate difficult situations.
Absolutely. Okay, now let's talk about George Washington. He had this lifelong guiding principle in the calm light of mild philosophy.
It was very Washingtonian.
And he applied it to everything, like personal attacks, political disappointments, you name it.
So instead of reacting emotionally, he would step back and look at things rationally.
Exactly. And one of his friends said that Washington's greatest victory was over his own passions.
Like he was constantly battling his own impulses, his own desires.
And he won. He cultivated that space between stimulus and response, that ability to pause and think before acting.
That's so important, especially for leaders. You can't be making decisions based on emotion. You got to be level-headed.
Absolutely. And then there's Booker T. Washington, who dedicated his life to uplifting his race. And he was able to stay focused on that mission because he had a very clear main thing.
His purpose was crystal clear.
And the sources challenge us to ask ourselves, what's our main thing? What's the one thing that matters most to us?
Because without that clear sense of purpose, it's so easy to get pulled in a million different directions.
Exactly. We become vulnerable to every opportunity, every shiny object that comes along, and we end up accomplishing very little.
John Steinbeck asked a great question. How can we balance the demands of the world with the needs of our family, our friends, ourselves?
Right. It's about saying yes to the things that truly matter and no to everything else.
Like that story about the Navy SEAL who refused to take on any additional tasks. He was already carrying the heaviest load.
Exactly. We got to know our limits, and we got to be willing to say no, even when it's hard.
So to achieve our main thing, we need the discipline to make it the main thing. No distractions.
Right. Now let's talk about focus.
Yeah.
And they use Beethoven as an example. He could become so absorbed in his music that he would literally forget to eat or sleep.
Wow. That's some serious focus.
Right. And the sources point out that true focus is actually pretty rare these days. We're constantly bombarded with distractions.
Yeah, phones, emails, social media. It's hard to stay focused on one thing for very long.
It is. But the point is, the ability to focus deeply is crucial for achieving anything meaningful. Goethe, the German writer, he had a similar ability to shut out the world.
Like the muses favor the focused.
Exactly. And they even reframe those absent-minded professors as examples of people who are fully committed to their work. They're just not paying attention to anything else.
I like that.
And the Stoic philosopher Epictetus, he said, don't put off living a good life. Don't wait for a better time. Start now.
So don't wait for the perfect conditions. Just get started.
Exactly. And this brings us to patience. The sources use Joyce Carol Oates again as an example. She's incredibly productive, but she also knows that good work takes time. You can't rush it.
And waiting for the right moment can be agonizing, but it's worth it.
Absolutely. Aristotle said, patience is bitter, but its fruit is sweet.
That's a good one.
Right. And the sources emphasize that patience is just as important as hustle, just as important as hard work. Think of Edison again, spending years perfecting the light bulb.
Or anyone who's achieved something truly great, they didn't do it overnight.
Exactly. Impatience leads to mistakes, to frustration, to giving up too soon. Leonardo da Vinci said, patience serves as protection against wrongs as clothes do against cold.
So it's a form of armor?
Yeah, it protects us from making rash decisions, from burning bridges, from sabotaging our own efforts.
So the message is, buckle up and wait, be patient, it'll pay off in the end.
And if things were easy and didn't require patience, we wouldn't need discipline in the first place, right?
That's true.
Okay, now this one might surprise you. The danger of perfectionism. And they use Martha Graham, the famous dancer and choreographer, as an example.
Really?
Yeah, she was so focused on the flaws in her work, even when others praised it, that she struggled to enjoy her accomplishments.
It's like she was her own worst critic.
And the sources call perfectionism a terrible vice. It prevents us from appreciating what we've achieved, and it can stifle our creativity.
Because we're so afraid of making mistakes?
Exactly. The Stoics believed that abandoning a pursuit because you're afraid it won't be perfect is a form of cowardice.
So it takes courage to keep going, even when you know it won't be flawless.
And Martha Graham's musical director told her that transitions are just as important as achievements, meaning it's okay to have moments where you're not at your peak.
I like that. It's about embracing the whole journey, not just the highlights.
And the sources really drive home the point that perfect is the enemy of good. Like, if we're constantly striving for perfection, we'll never actually finish anything.
Because nothing will ever be good enough.
Exactly. And just finishing something, bringing it to completion, is a huge act of discipline in itself.
So if you struggle with perfectionism, find someone who can provide some balance. Someone who can remind you to celebrate the wins.
Good advice.
Ah.
Now, let's talk about procrastination, because we all do it. Montaigne said, anything you can do another day can be done now.
So no more excuses.
Right. And Horace said, he who postpones the hour of living right is like the rustic who waits for the river to run out before he crosses.
Meaning we're always waiting for the perfect time, but it never comes.
And the Stoics were even more blunt. They said, you could be good now, instead you chose tomorrow.
Ouch.
Yeah, it's a call to action. They're basically saying procrastination is a form of arrogance. Like, we assume we'll have more discipline in the future than we do now.
And we end up with a whole graveyard of lost potential, all those things we wanted to do but never started.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the message is clear. Start now, and start with the hardest part.
Because that's where you'll really prove yourself.
Okay, now let's talk about the importance of getting back up after a setback. And they use Floyd Patterson, the boxer, as an example. He lost his heavyweight title because he was overconfident, wasn't focused.
And he was devastated, felt like he'd let everyone down.
And what's really cool is that another boxer, Archie Moore, wrote him a letter of encouragement. He offered support and advice, even though they were competitors.
That's classy.
Right. And that act of kindness helped Patterson regain his confidence and eventually win back the title.
Shows that even our rivals can be sources of inspiration.
Absolutely. And the sources emphasize that everyone makes mistakes, everyone loses sometimes. It's what you do after that defines you.
Like that image of someone getting knocked down but getting right back up, that's resilience. That's self-discipline in action.
And it's something we can all learn from. Okay, now let's talk about the battle against pain. And they use JFK as an example. He suffered from chronic back pain and other ailments.
Yeah, I've read about that. He was in a lot of pain.
And he sought relief through medication, through risky procedures.
And it probably wasn't the healthiest approach.
Right. And the sources point out that while the pain itself might not be our fault, our choices about how to manage it are.
So we have a responsibility to take care of ourselves, even when it's hard.
Exactly. And there's a story about a doctor who examined JFK and discovered that he couldn't even do one sit-up.
And what did the doctor do?
He prescribed exercise. He told JFK that he needed to strengthen his core muscles.
So it wasn't about masking the pain. It was about addressing the underlying cause.
Exactly. And the message is resist those quick fixes. Look for the long-term solutions.
Because sometimes the best way to deal with pain is to push through it, to build that resilience.
Now let's talk about Epicurus. He's often portrayed as a hedonist, someone who's all about pleasure.
Yeah, I remember learning about him in philosophy class.
But the sources argue that he actually believed in moderation and self-control. Yeah, there's an inscription above his garden that talks about quenched appetites, meaning true pleasure comes from finding balance, from satisfying your needs without going overboard.
So it's not about denying yourself everything. It's about being responsible.
Exactly. And they make a distinction between abstinence and restraint. Like abstinence is just saying no to everything. Restraint is about making conscious choices, about knowing your limits.
And Musonius Rufus said, nothing is more pleasant than self-control, and nothing is more painful than lack of self-control.
So true. Okay, now let's talk about controlling your temper. The sources call it the battle against provocation.
Like not letting your emotions get the best of you.
Exactly. And they use Lincoln as an example. He was known for his incredible patience, his ability to stay calm, even under intense pressure.
And he famously said, if you're going to stop and reply to every attack, you might as well admit defeat right now.
Right. It's about choosing your battles, about not letting yourself get dragged down by every little annoyance.
It's like Aesop's fable about the lion and the gnat. The lion got so annoyed by the gnat that he ended up hurting himself trying to swat it away.
And the moral of the story is, sometimes the best response is to just ignore the little things.
Focus on the bigger picture.
Exactly. Now let's talk about passion. And the sources actually caution against unchecked passion.
Really? I thought passion was a good thing.
It can be, but it can also be destructive. They use the example of Sam Cassell, the basketball player who injured himself celebrating a victory.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And the point is, passion can cloud our judgment, make us act recklessly.
Like we get so caught up in the moment that we forget to think about the consequences.
Exactly. And they mention things like arrogance, anger, anxiety, even excessive exuberance as forms of passion that can lead to trouble.
Even Democritus, the ancient Greek philosopher, called sex a mild madness.
Wow.
Yeah, and John Wooden, the legendary basketball coach, he preferred controlled intensity to uncontrolled passion.
So it's not about suppressing passion altogether. It's about channeling it, directing it towards something positive.
And that takes discipline.
A lot of it. And there's an irony here, right? Like, often the people who have the most power, the most freedom to act, are the ones who would benefit most from restraint.
Because they have the furthest to fall.
Exactly. And in today's world, with social media and everything, it's so easy to get caught up in pointless arguments, to let our emotions run wild.
The sources ask some good questions. Can you keep a secret? Can you bite your tongue when you disagree with someone? Can you endure being misunderstood?
Those are tough ones.
They are, but they're essential for maintaining your composure, your integrity.
And Zeno, the Stoic philosopher, he had some simple advice. 2 ears, 1 mouth. Meaning, listen more than you speak.
Words to live by.
For sure. Okay, now let's talk about Winston Churchill. He's a great example of the power of deliberate restraint.
How so?
Well, after the devastating defeat at Dunkirk, he famously said, "This is not the decisive moment." And he resisted calls for an immediate second front in Europe, even though the pressure was immense. Expert.